Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 2021 Virtual Grand Canyon Star Party. I'm Ranger Raider Lane, National Park Service Coordinator for the event. And for 31 years running, Grand Canyon has been celebrating its pristine night skies through this annual Grand Canyon Star Party. Now, ordinarily, we invite hundreds of astronomers and thousands upon thousands of visitors to the park to enjoy 8 nights of some of the darkest night skies in the United States. Each evening is kicked off with a special guest speaker in our theater, followed by telescope viewing sessions, constellation programs, night sky photography workshops, and much, much more. Now, next year's Grand Canyon Star Party is June 18th through the 25th, 2022. So mark your calendars, and hopefully next year we'll be able to celebrate on site. Once again, this year we're bringing the Grand Canyon Star Party to you through this virtual realm. And before we introduce our special guest this evening, I just have a couple entities I got to thank from the National Park Service for their support in this event. Number one is the Grand Canyon Conservancy. Now, they're the park's official nonprofit partner and do a lot of help with the park promoting dark skies. The International Dark Sky Association is another entity we want to thank. They are the group that has certified Grand Canyon National Park as an international dark sky park back in 2019. The Tucson Amateur Astronomy Association, now they're the group that will be conducting the virtual telescope viewing session after this presentation, and they're the group that has been coming up to Grand Canyon for 30 years conducting the on-site volunteer astronomy. Finally, I want to thank the Society for Cultural Astronomy in the American Southwest. They're a fantastic group that has helped to organize some of our special guest speakers this year. Finally, stay tuned for our virtual telescope viewing session to premiere right after this talk. And with that, I want to introduce tonight's special guest speaker. Tonight, we are honored to have Ed Cabody with us. Ed is a third-generation artist from the Hopi village of Shogompevi and the Tewa village of Kapo Oinge. He considers himself to be an edutainer, blending visual art, music, and the spoken word to advocate for the plight of the people in the lands of the Colorado Plateau. He also fronts a rock reggae band called the Yotes, short for Coyotes, and spends a lot of his time howling at the moon and the stars. Ed, thanks so much for coming.
Yeah.
It's great for you to be here, man.
Thank you so much, man. It's a blessing to be here. So herang ho umiagin di nabik emain o huaping ang umu kwari ari ka to ahap o winge ari komope o winge o hosonge weri lentawi an ho pipa tsewa honanguma. My name is Ed Cabody, and I'm from the Hopi village of Sumopave, as was said, and the Tewa village of Kapo Owinge. I'd like to begin this session with just sharing a flute song for you, and then we'll get into the content. Thank you so much for tuning in. And yeah, let's get into some story.
Thanks so much, Ed. That was amazing.
All right. So what I would like to speak about tonight is perhaps a little bit of a cultural perspective of the stars. But I want to begin here looking at a European deck of cards, and I want to just demonstrate something. In this deck of cards here, we have 4 suits, just like we have 4 seasons here in the world. And then you notice that there's 13 cards in each suit, just the same way that there's 13 weeks in each season. If you count the ace as 1 and you count the jack as 11, the queen is 12, the king is 13, and add up the sum of each suit, adding 1 all the way up to 13, then you're going to come up with the number 91. There's 91 days in each season. If you multiply the 91 days times the 4 suits, then you're going to get 364. I sometimes ask, how many cards are there in a deck of cards? And often the answer comes back 52. There's 52 weeks in a year, but there's actually not 52 cards in a deck. There's actually 54. There's a joker, and the first joker is that 365th day. And the second joker is the leap year that comes around every 4 years. These things, observations about the stars, observations about the cycles of the moon and the sun, these are native to every human being. These are native to all of us. In our culture, as Puebloan people, we also share a great connection with the stars. This is a painting done by a woman from my village in Ka'o'owinge. This is a lady by the name of Pablita Velarde. And what she is sharing here is a scene, a cultural scene of our people. Actually, really the best time to approach an indigenous person about stars is actually the opposite of what we're doing right now. It really should be done in the winter. These are the times that our responsibilities in the field slow down, and we're able to gather, during the long nights and gather for warmth. And then our tete, Nambitete, our grandfather, then tells us stories. And as he tells stories, he begins with constellations. And you can see here that he's pointing to the North Star to begin the journey with these children and these education of these children about the migrations of their people. Above him is the path of people walking, and that's the Milky Way, which represents our migrations to come to the places that we are. Of course, you can see way off to the right hand of the screen, the right upper corner, you'll also recognize the constellation of Orion, which is another very important constellation in the story of our people, as well as others. The North Star is a unique star. It's unchanging, it's unmoving. All of the other stars rotate around that particular star. And that's, that foundational point in our concept as Puebloan people. We believe that we emerged from the womb of the earth in a kind of not how can I express this? In more of a children's type of version of our story of emergence. There's a Tewa story about how when we came into this world, we had come from the lower world, so we were kind of blind. We couldn't see, our eyes weren't adjusted to the light, and we heard this little voice, Kukyang Su'uti, the spider woman, our godmother. We heard her speaking to us, put your hands over your eyes and open them and do it 4 times. And each time that we did it, we could see a little bit better until the 4th time that we could see clearly. But that North Star represents that point of emergence, that place that all peoples in our paradigm came into this world. Now, when we came into this world in another story, in a Hopi version of of our emergence, they say that Coyote, was the one that put the stars in their place, because there were the warrior brothers that were putting up the constellations in a very beautiful way. But Coyote just kind of decided to help them when everybody went to sleep and threw everything out in a haphazard way, So Coyote also has a very close relationship with the stars. But as I mentioned, in our own theory of how we came into this world, we believe that all people emerged into this world. I recognize that there's a scientific theory about how human beings came to inhabit this world. There's also many religious theories, and probably one that we're familiar with would be the first man, first woman in the Garden of Eden in the Judeo-Christian story. In our story, our life as people begins on this earth through our emergence. And among Puebloan people, they point to different places. Very commonly, Hopi recognizes a place in the Grand Canyon as the first place of emergence, where we came together in this world. And as we came together in this world, we recognized that our migrations would be according to the direction of the stars. Here in this slide, and this, by the way, is a portion of a mural from my from my father's mural that is actually up at the Museum of Northern Arizona right now, and it was co-created with my father and my brother/grandfather in the Hopi way, Delbert Honani. But you can see here that it has an aerial view of Chaco Canyon, Pueblo Bonito. And Chaco Canyon is an example of, again, in our theory, how we migrated through this world after our emergence and left our footprints all throughout the Colorado Plateau as Puebloan people. We were collecting knowledge, collecting medicine, and when stars would align in a certain way, then we would come to the places that were designated for us, from the Creator. But as we made these footsteps, many of the people gained certain knowledge. And at Pueblo Bonito, again, this is the aerial view. You see the upper right-hand corner, you see the D-shaped view of the structure of Pueblo Bonito. And that line that goes across there is perfectly aligned. That is the base of the D shape of that fortress, or of that structure, is actually perfectly aligned with the rising and the setting of the sun on the equinoxes. Our people are very closely aligned in culture with the movement of the sun, with the movement of the stars. And again, another example of that is at Chaco Canyon, what is known as Fajada Butte there. And there is the marker, the petroglyph, that at solstice on noonday, summer solstice, you see this bright marker splitting straight down the middle of it. You can also see an orange marker to the left of that spiral, and that's actually a demonstration of the path of the moon in its full moon extremes that are also marked by this particular petroglyph. I've heard that this is the only ancient site where both the lunar cycle and the solar cycle are brought together in one. Our people had many watchtowers, observances, and only recently have the archaeologists begin to recognize how many solstice, equinox, and lunar markings are all throughout the structures of Puebloan architecture. Back in 1932, the watchtower at the south rim of the Grand Canyon at Desert View was opened, and this tower was replicated by many of the observational towers from the Jovenhuip area and Mesa Verde area of the Four Corners region. And my grandfather, here pictured on the right, was commissioned back then by the Harvey Company to create murals in this in the tower. There were 4 artists involved, and the upper floors have ancient galleries of prehistoric sites from all over the Four Corner states. This building was really erected as a tribute to the ancient peoples of the plateau. But on the bottom floor of the tower, or actually there is one floor below it, but that's a staff area. But the bottom guest floor of the tower is the largest room, and there my grandfather was given artistic freedom to share what he thought appropriate. And to me, he's a good guy to pick for this, because my grandfather is the son of the Sun Clan people. He's Bluebird Clan, which also means that he has a strong collective knowledge of the histories of many of the people of Hopi. But as a son of the Sun Clan, he's also very influenced by the people of the of his father, who are sun watchers. So in the tower, my grandfather painted as the main emblem, the main feature in that room, the story of the first young man to go down the Colorado River, and disappointing Major Powell. He took his journey about 1,500 years before Major Powell, and that story is told in those 4 panels in the circle. But you also notice that there is also a lot of astronomy. And if you look above, the next time that you visit the watchtower, you'll recognize the Pleiades, you'll recognize the belt of Orion, you'll recognize the Big Dipper and the North Star, which are also very important constellations. You see here in this slide of the Rattlesnake Clan's story, above is the sun, and below is the moon, and surrounding it are the rain clouds with lightning. At the extreme right corner and the extreme left corner, you also see the morning and the evening stars. And my grandfather, again, having a strong influence from the Sun people, really painted this mural with a lot of thoughtfulness. At the Grand Canyon, you find out that in 1540, a member of the Coronado expedition, Cardenas Conquistador, came to view the Grand Canyon. And this was in 1540, which I like to point out to people is 67 years before Jamestown. The people of the Southwest are first contact people in the United States, what we call the United States. The story of European invasion did not begin on the East Coast. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and 115 years took place before England established its first continuous colony in Jamestown in 1607. The conquest of America went from the Caribbean islands into Mexico, then into South America, and then into the two southern corners of the United States, Florida and New Mexico and Arizona. Our people were under the inquisitional rule of Spain between 1598 and 1680. But in 1680, after a public hanging in Santa Fe of our people, of our medicine men, our holy men, there was an uprising, and it's a remarkable story about how runners, because it was illegal for a Native American to own a horse, runners carried knotted cords, and they carried these message of the revolt to all of the villages in northern New Mexico and northern Arizona. Each knot in this cord represented a day, and simultaneously the same number of knots was being untied all throughout the villages of northern New Mexico, northern Arizona. On August 10th of 1680, our people rose up against Spain, and we became the only group of Native American people in all of written history to actually oust an established European colony from our homeland back in 1680. I consider that war the first war for religious freedom on what we call the United States. This is my father's depiction of that time period, and also my grandfather's. But we gotta consider, how and why was this particular revolt timed? What was the timing? There were actually two of the runners, and I'm trying to go back to the runner slide, and let me see if I can do that. There were two runners in Tesuque that were actually apprehended and hung in Santa Fe. The leaders of the revolt could have canceled the revolt. The leaders of the revolt could have postponed the revolt, but they did neither. And this has always puzzled me a little bit. Why is it that the leaders have, didn't cancel the revolt when they knew that they were found out? A whole nother group of runners was dispatched to move the revolt forward. So the revolt was actually planned to start some days later than August the 10th. But the new date was chosen to move it up to August the 10th, which is a feast day for the Spanish, the Feast of St. Lawrence. Among the Tewa people, my mother's people, my people, we've been known among Pueblo people as a people that initiate war when it's necessary. I come from the Badger clan, and I guess I kind of look at the people kind of like that. We're kind of like Badgers. Badgers are known to be kind of shy. We avoid conflict, but when it's necessary, then it's necessary. Among the culture of war of our people is a very close connection with astronomy. Let me get back to another slide. And I pointed out that in the two extremes of this particular mural, you see the morning and the evening star, representing, not only the observation of stars, but also Puebloan observation of planets. It's my theory that it was the position of the planets that made it necessary for the people to not cancel the revolt, but to move forward with it. In my theory, it's because the songs had been sung, the alignments of the stars and the planets were acknowledged to be favorable to the revolt, and the people had already made a commitment they couldn't stop, because the constellations and the alignment of the constellations, they move forward. Now, this is my theory, but I believe that because of the way our people go to war, that this is probably the reason why. Anyway, the point to all of this is that our people have a very close association, as all people do, with the heavenly bodies above us. As people of the plateau, you know, we've had a very intimate relationship with the stars all throughout our journey, and even today in our present way of life. In my work as an edutainer, it's my mission to share the plight of the people and lands of the Colorado Plateau, and to share issues that we're facing today. So in conclusion, I would like to just look at the analogy of that Pueblo revolt, of how we looked for the signs that were favorable to us, how we recognized, you know, when it was the right time by the position of the stars. I feel like by analogy today, our country is facing some signs in the heavens, you know. By analogy, an awakening of conscience, you know, has come upon us, a call to action. And I think it's not only recognizing the disparities that exist among African American communities, Hispanic American communities, Asian American communities, Native American communities. By looking at all these things, recognizing that we all are all also today in a war. We're also in a fight. And it's maybe probably the most important fight that any of our fathers have ever faced, and that is to restore conscious thought to our world. When I sit under the stars, and as I was accused of howl at the moon and the stars, I recognize that there are some things that never change. And I don't believe that politics has the answers to our greatest problems. I believe that when we look to the things that never change, the cycles of the sun, the cycles of the moon, the cycles of the stars, then we can recognize and have that peace within ourselves and seek for those conscious and spiritual answers. Thank you guys so much for your time, and Kokwai.
Well, Ed, thanks so much for that wonderful talk. I mean, just so many things you said blew my mind there in just that short amount of time. I have so many questions, but just a couple, I guess, that are at the forefront, or I guess some things to comment. I'd love to hear your comment on. You know, it's such a testament to the indigenous people's intimacy with this land over so much time, when you mentioned even things as simple as using the knots in the rope to be able to reckon time, you know, to be able to spread that message about the revolt across vast distances. You know, just that idea of untying the knot every single day as a way to mark that day so that everybody can come together and revolt the colonizers out is a testament to not only the intimacy with the night sky, but just the intimacy with the sun and the moon and reckoning time that way. Do you have any comment on the prevalence of sun watching in, for example, Hopi culture? Like, how important is sun watching as a means to reckon time for maybe ceremonial or agricultural purposes?
Yeah, so maybe I prefer to answer it in this way, because I think that this is a phenomena among Puebloan people, you know, and I don't really you know, as a Tewa, you know, my father is Hopi and my grandfather is Hopi in indoctrination and in discipline and in life view. You know, my clanship comes from a different place, you know, so I think that's important to recognize. But I also recognize with that perspective that, you know, the watching of the sun and the moon cycles is something very predominant among all Pueblo cultures. And of course, you know, we're an agricultural people. So there are certain people in the traditional way of life, you know, in the old structure of our communities that have that responsibility, you know, and many still that carry out that responsibility of announcing times to plant or announcing times for certain activities of the community or ceremony. You know, that's a very important role. Personally, when I was a kid, and I mentioned my grandfather, see, we're named by our father's people, but we become what our mothers are. So I'm a Badger clan, for instance, that comes from my mother, but my Hopi name's Novayokva. It's already snowing, or Lentawi, flute song. Those come from my father's people. In the case of my grandfather, his father is Sun Clan. And so Kabodi is actually taken from the name Nakavoma, which sounds nothing like Kabodi, but that is referring to the path of the sun. And the name literally means day after day. And so very strong name, but his uncles always teased him, that's too good, name's too good for you. You're not day after day, you're just mañana. So my grandfather's nickname became Kavote, Kavo, tomorrow. And it got anglicized when he went to boarding school. They pulled a name out of the hat and said, okay, you're Fred now. And then they took his Indian name and turned it into his last name, which was anglicized, and it was already a nickname. So my last name, Kabodi, is actually, a kind of funky pronunciation of a Hopi nickname, but it comes from the Sun people. My grandfather, being influenced by his father's people, he was one of the most intimate watchers of the sun I've ever known. He drew the horizon on his calendar every month, and then he put little hash marks as to where the sun was coming up, and he put the time of day, or the time, you know, that the sun rose. And he did that every month, you know, just diligently watching the sun, you know.
Wow.
Yeah, one of the most, pardon my language, but hard ass Hopi farmers that I've ever known, you know.
That's awesome. I love that. That's something that, you know, I think the indigenous peoples of this land have much to teach everybody worldwide, is that continuation of observational astronomy. You know, we all do everything by calculation nowadays, but there's this beauty in this tradition of getting out every day, and just something as simple as marking it physically on a calendar is just, what a wonderful observational astronomy method that deserves to be preserved. And finally, on that front, in terms of preservation, I'd be curious about your thoughts on the idea of constellation knowledge and such sacred knowledge within some Puebloan cultures. You know, it's very important. And what's your view on sacred knowledge and the apparent sort of problem of, from a Western perspective, or, you know, or a European perspective, of wanting to preserve knowledge by writing it down, and but also there's this idea that sacred knowledge, in a way, kind of, you know, it's not to be written down. It's to be, if it goes, it goes, and it's supposed to leave and be ephemeral, maybe, or just passed down orally. I guess I'm muddling the question a little bit, but I'm just curious about what your thoughts are on the importance of preserving, for example, constellation knowledge and that traditional knowledge, but also respecting the methods by which that is passed on. Do you encourage people to write this stuff down and publish it, for example?
Yeah, no, no, no. Yeah, simple answer. I think there's many reasons for that, but I don't think I even need to discuss it about reasons for that. You had mentioned in your comment before about interacting. There's how we do everything by calculations today, and then now, and how different it is when we're actually interacting with our landscapes, and how different it is when we're actually interacting with with our observations. It's been said that this is also in the practice of culture, that when we write things down and we shelve things, we kind of have a tendency to forget about them. We don't interact with it anymore. I mean, it's documented, we don't need to think about it anymore. And I thought that was kind of a profound thought, because recognizing that in traditional cultures, knowledge is an interaction. You're interacting with the knowledge, you're interacting with your teachings, and it's in a very different way than what happens when things are being written down in a document. So those are just some thoughts.
Oh man, well, thanks so much. Great thoughts. I think that's a great way to end it. Everybody, make sure you tune in to the virtual telescope viewing session that's premiering right after this. And hopefully, next year or in the coming years, you all can come to the Grand Canyon on site and meet Ed in person and talk story with him. So thanks again so much, Ed. It was a great pleasure and honor to have you as one of our participants. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Love and respect.